Good morning, everyone, and what a beautiful room. Thanks for joining us for this lovely panel. We're here to discuss the intersections between humanity and nature, which is, of course, a theme that is no stranger to all of us on the coast. We live in such a beautiful environment, so great to be here. I'd like to start by acknowledging that this is Darkinjung country and pay my respects to elders past and present of this beautiful place and their ongoing connection to this land, its airways and its waterways. We'll be talking a lot about those themes this morning. Now, some of you might have noticed that one of our panellists, Nadi Simpson, has been replaced by the fabulous Donna Cameron this morning. Unfortunately, Nadi is unwell and couldn't join us, but we've been very blessed to be joined by a local gifted writer, Donna Cameron, who is talking about her book, The Rewilding, this morning, which has beautiful themes that are absolutely connected to the conversations we're having. So I'll just introduce our wonderful panel. I will be leaving time for question and answer at the end, so if you can start thinking about any questions that come to you out of this conversation or your engagement with these beautiful books. So I'd like to introduce you first to Donna. Donna is an Augie-nominated radio dramatist, award-winning playwright and short film writer. She was the screenwriter for The Salt Maiden, which premiered at the 2014 Cannes Film Festival and won Best Screenplay and Short Film at the Port Stephens Film Festival and was overall winner of the 2015 Avoca Cinema Film Festival in our local Avoca. Her debut novel, Beneath the Mother Tree, was chosen for the Screen Queensland's Adaptable program and longlisted for the David Awards. The manuscript for her second novel, The Rewilding, won her a KSP Fellowship and gained a Varuna Fellowship. Published last year, The Rewilding has also just this week been longlisted for the David Awards. So please join me in welcoming Donna. Next we have the New York Times bestselling author Charlotte McConaghy, who has authored 3 novels of adult fiction. One, Migrations, which is a Time magazine Best Book of the Year and Amazon Best Fiction Book of the Year for 2020 and has been adapted to film and translated in over 25 languages. Bestseller Once Were Wolves, which won the Indie Book of the Book Award for Fiction and the David Award for Best Adult Crime Novel in 2012. And her latest novel, which we'll be discussing today, is Wild Dark Shore, which was name-checked recently by none other than former PM Julia Gillard in her address at the Sorrento's Writers' Festival, and we were just hearing out the back, has been optioned in a very exciting way. So welcome, Charlotte. And finally, we have the multi-talented writer and critic James Bradley, whose books include the novels Rack, The Deep Field, Clade, Ghost Species, and his latest, Landfall, which we'll be hearing about this morning. He's also given us a book of poetry, Paper Nautilus, and a work of non-fiction, Deep Water, which just this last week won the 2025 New South Wales Literary Award. And it was fantastic, a wonderful... So dinner's on, James, everybody. So we are in really good hands here. These people are obviously highly multi-talented and have a lot to say in their important work. Our theme today is, of course, human/nature, and the themes these writers explore take us deep into how our environment shapes us and how this is intimately linked with our humanity, how our stories are connected to all living things and how our collective humanity may either just destroy us or save us. Charlotte, if I can start with you. Your novel, Wild Dark Shore, takes us to the fictional Shearwater Island, which I believe is based very closely on Macquarie Island, and which is a home to seals, albatrosses, a research base, and is between Australia and Antarctica, among a beautiful but very challenging landscape. And in this environment, we have a grieving family desperately trying to hold themselves and the last of their infrastructure together to protect a precious seed vault, which holds much of the world's biodiversity. The extraordinary resilience and the human vulnerability of this family is palpable, and it's very moving, I must say. So maybe if you can just share with us what your novel seeks to explore about human resilience and courage in our relationship to nature.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Georgie. Okay. So this is very, very much a book about courage. I think each of my 3 novels take a look at climate change, but also how we relate to the wilderness beyond us and the wilderness within us. And they do that through 3 different emotional lenses. Migrations was through a lens of sadness. It was a way for me to explore the sadness of species loss in particular. Once There Were Wolves was through a lens of rage. It was fury about the way that I could see us harming each other and wild creatures and the natural world. And this one is, I think, very much through a lens of fear, and specifically the fear of what it means to have children in a catastrophic world. What our responsibilities are to our children, how we teach them about love, what love means in the face of loss, and how we teach them to connect even with impending impermanence. And, those are things that I sort of needed to work through and explore in order to find a way to take you through that kind of darkness to a place that's much brighter. And the brighter side of it was by focusing on the courage of these main characters. That was the only sort of way that I could kind of find my way through. There are many different shapes that takes in the book. It's about loving children even when you aren't sure that you can keep them safe. It's about taking up the fight even when you're not sure that you're able to win it. But I think, ultimately that sense of hopelessness gets mitigated with those sparks of love and courage.
And they are such extraordinary children. I'm going to ask you to read a little bit from one of their points of view in a moment. Thanks so much, Charlotte. James, if I can ask you. So Landfall follows some police officers. In some ways it's a procedural, right? Trying to protect a sense of humanity and order amidst the ongoing crisis of climate catastrophe. So the world you depict in Landfall it's become quite broken. It's really tribal. It's kind of Mad Max meets 1984 with all the surveillance. And I must say I kept getting these really visceral shocks when I saw references in this world to Sydney and the world that, is very familiar to us in this sort of not too distant future. So we're in the midst of heat waves, floods, and a really broken city. Amidst all this devastation, though, there's still this extraordinary effort, all these really good people hanging on and trying to do their best to save a vulnerable child's life. What does your novel wish to express about the enduring aspects of humanity and human kindness in the midst of climate disasters?
Yeah, so the novel is... it is actually just a police procedural. I'm not ashamed of that. It's a crime novel, and it's set about 30 years from now in Sydney that's been kind of transformed by climate change. And it's about two police officers trying to find a little girl who's gone missing, and it's set over about 5 days. This kind of giant storm bears down on the city, and they're trying to find the kid before the storm hits. And I'd written a couple of novels before. Like Charlotte, I've been ploughing this territory for a while in different ways. But I'd written a couple of novels before it, which they're both quite large in their kind of themes, but they're in a way quite confined in their settings. So the first one, Clade, is about a family, and it kind of follows them through about 50 years. And then the second one is set around this kind of scientific experiment in Tasmania, and it's quite a confined kind of book. And I wanted to write a book which was, I guess, kind of looking straight into a series of the questions around climate, around questions of justice, around questions of migration, and around the kind of unequal ways that the kind of effects of climate change are experienced. And the migration one's really important. I mean, the estimates suggest that within about 20 years we'll have about 1 billion people on the move in the world as a result of climate change. We're already at a point where I think it's about 100 million people displaced last year. About 2/3 of them were displaced by climate impacts. I mean, it's already happening. And I wanted to write about that. And it seemed to me that a crime novel was a really interesting way of doing that, because crime in a sense, lets you do that kind of large-scale social picture. You can kind of give a picture of a society. That's what crime does. It kind of homes in on the kind of faults both in people but also in societies. And it seemed to me to be a really interesting way of trying to tell that story. But I also wanted to think about, I think we get told a story about what disaster means, like what social breakdown means, like what all of these things means. And it is a story that comes straight out of America, and it's a story that comes straight out of their kind of, imaginary about the frontier and all of that kind of thing. And it's that world of The Walking Dead. It's that world of Mad Max. It's that world where when things go bad, people turn on each other. And the actual evidence of the world is that is not the case. The evidence of the world is that when, the northern rivers flood and the government doesn't turn up, people get in their boats and go out and help their neighbours. And I wanted to kind of write something which kind of pushed back a bit against that kind of sense of this world where, we're driven by envy, we're driven by individualism, we're driven by kind of, those kinds of forces, and think about other ways. I actually think it's a really important question at the moment. I think we live in a world where there's this kind of theatre of cruelty that's going on. You only have to look at America, and see the way that, essentially being an asshole and saying, I don't care about other people, is actually seen as a sign of strength. And I just wanted to write something that kind of pushed back against that a bit and said, look, being cruel to people doesn't make you a big man, it just makes you an asshole, and that, that actually kind of kindness and trying to help people is where the kind of strength of societies and the strengths of people come from. So, yeah, that's the answer to that question.
I love that. Thanks, James. Yeah. Donna, if we can talk about the Rewilding. So this is a breathless chase thriller. We're following a really unlikely duo, a totally feral climate activist, Nia, and a corporate whistleblower, Jagger, and they end up on the run together, overcoming all these sort of life and death situations as they navigate some of Australia's most extraordinary landscapes, including around here, I must say. The beautiful Budai National Park is part of the setting for the novel. What does their journey tell us about the capacity of humans to save ourselves from ourselves?
Well, I think I wrote this book to save myself from myself. It came out of incredible climate grief and rage and anger. And I needed to write it because I needed hope. So I wrote my way towards hope. And I found a lot to be hopeful for. We don't hear the good stuff that's happening. I think, like James says, we are just one of the most remarkable, compassionate, imaginative species on the face of this earth. And in the research and the writing of this book, I realised that, if anyone can, save ourselves, it could be us. I was saying backstage, this book was actually, I started writing it 6 years ago. My second book, which has just gone out on, my third book actually, has just gone out on commission, and it's, not as hopeful, I've got to say, but anyhow. 6 years is a very long time in climate change, and there's been 6 years of non-action, so... but anyhow, the pandemic gave me incredible hope, so I was writing this in the pandemic, and emissions they dropped 17% within weeks, days, not months. Like the planet responds really quickly to us when we change our behaviour. So we stopped moving around the world, and suddenly the air cleared. And I went and saw Tim Winton talk about Ningaloo, and he said, within days the reef started recovering, healing itself when human intervention was stopped there. So that gave me incredible hope. fungi gives me incredible hope. We're finding all sorts of amazing things happening with fungi. They've found a fungus in the Ecuadorian rainforest that eats plastic, and that's a game changer. I think the English government at the moment is trying to get something happening with that. Like, imagine if we could clear up all our plastic in the world with fungi. In fact, yesterday I saw Swiss scientists had developed a battery made out of fungi that, conducts electricity with water and sugar, and then when the battery's kind of finished, it just dissolves it, like it eats itself. There's no toxic waste. So we are incredible, and I've got to cling to that because I'm a mum, and we all need hope, because as Charlotte said in the green room, what's the alternative? Like, despair is going to get us nowhere. So, yeah.
So it might not be humanity that saves us, but it could be the mushrooms. Thanks, Donna. That's great.
Always the mushrooms.
You
have to read my book for the mushrooms thing.
Indeed.
Just not those ones they serve in Victoria.
Yeah. Exactly. I was going to say the Leon Gather story. Maybe not. And obviously we were talking a bit backstage about the balance of hope and fury, and we'll talk a little bit more about that through the panel. We've all been experiencing weeks of inundation here on the coast and very aware of the floods just north of us. It's been an extraordinary time. You wouldn't know it to look out the window, but we've all been experiencing just the extraordinary effects of deluges of water. Water is a theme, a very strong theme in all of your novels. And I'm curious to kind of explore how you've each used that creatively, but also kind of to create a sense of time passing and urgency amongst your characters. Charlotte, one of your central characters, Rowan, literally washes up on Shearwater Island. She has a well-founded terror of the water. And the water itself is a constant source of both joy and menace to the characters that take her in, this family. And, I've just started Migrations. All of your characters seem to constantly be plunging into freezing water. I've been reading it under my doona going, oh my God. So what was it a really important creative choice for you to set this novel amongst one of the wildest oceans in the world?
I think I just naturally gravitate towards wild, rocky coastlines. The ocean in this book, I think, makes up a third of for lack of a better way of explaining it, a third of a three-pronged attack on these people. Rowan, who is the main character, as Georgie explained, she washes up on this coastline, is rescued by this family, and it takes on a sort of a I like to think of it as a gothic romantic mystery because they are each keeping secrets from each other. But Rowan is bringing huge emotional baggage with her. She is an pessimist. She's an eco-pessimist who carries a lot of kind of grief from her background. Her beautiful home that she built herself has been destroyed in a fire. And so she's got this sort of belief or fear that we will all either drown, burn, or starve one day. And she sort of brings this real darkness with her to this family, who are actually incredibly optimistic and quite joyful, and take a lot of delight in the ocean. And anyway, so the three sort of prongs are the ocean and drowning, fire, bushfires, and then the seed bank kind of represents this idea, this notion that without these kind of really important agricultural seeds, we may starve. And they have this urgent ticking clock, as you call it. The seed bank is flooding. They are put in a really difficult position where they have to decide which seeds they're going to save for relocation. And that was kind of based on the Svalbard Global Seed Bank, which is right up in the very north of Norway in the ice. It was a vault that was built in order to withstand anything and house the world's seeds for many years to come in the future. And the only thing they didn't foresee happening was that the temperatures would rise so much that the permafrost would melt, and it flooded. They were able to save those seeds, but it got me thinking about what we choose to save. What would we choose to save if we were given the choice? And so I made my seed bank not only filled with agricultural seeds, but with all the seeds of the world, the strange, the beautiful, the unusual, the things that we might not necessarily need. And I asked my characters to decide what to choose. Would it be the things that we need to eat? Or would there be one of them who's brave enough to pose that, our kind of incredible selfishness is what got us into this position to begin with, and maybe it's together with all living things that is the only way out of it. And so it's actually a 9-year-old boy who really wants to save all the things that we don't need, the things that just exist in their own right. So that was a big ramble not about the ocean, but it's the sort of three-pronged thing. And the ocean, it is a complication. It's a danger for them. It's this rising kind of, it's eating the beaches. It's trying to flood the seed bank. But it's also an incredibly important part of the book without giving away the ending. It's Rowan in particular understanding that, in fact, the ocean is also a source for deep nurturing and salvation and survival. We are only here because of our oceans. So it's sort of, I wanted it to be twofold in the novel.
Wonderful, thanks Charlotte, and not rambling at all. So beautiful to hear you talk about these themes. So James, water's a hugely important theme in your novel as well. Your characters are navigating areas in present-day Sydney that known as, in your 30 years in the future, known in the novel as the floodline. There's a storm approaching, which gives a sense of urgency, and you've got days sort of passing as you get towards this stormland. What did you want to explore about the role of water, what it's eroded and what it is coming for your characters and its impact on their individual and collective experiences?
I've written quite a lot about water one way or another over, sorry, I'm stammering. My book, Deep Water, there's a lot about that, about water in it, obviously, given the title. But I guess with this one, water's such a dual thing. There's that kind of sense, there's that wonderful Toni Morrison line about, water has a perfect memory and it's always trying to get back home. But at the same time, water is this kind of occluding force, as it rises, it kind of swamps things and wipes them away, and so it's also this kind of force of, I guess, forgetting. And I think one of the things I was trying to think about in the book is both that kind of process as sea levels come up, of what's kind of lost as people are displaced, as they're moved, that kind of sense of displacement is a kind of really profound kind of loss, that kind of loss of the place you came from. So several of the characters in the book are from Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is basically gone. Like, sea levels have come up 5 metres, it's gone. So their country is gone. And that kind of sense of this really profound loss of the kind of landscapes that you come from, of the places that you come from. But it's also, I'm always very happy to talk about the thematic elements of books. I always feel a bit weird talking about the kind of imaginative stuff, but books always have a kind of deep structure, I think. And when you're writing them, you often don't know what that is until you're quite a long way into the book, or sometimes when you've finished it. But with this one, it was very much about water. There's a kind of thread running through it about water and bodies and the ways that people end up kind of taken into water and forgotten and dying and disappearing. So you've got this thing that's kind of both kind of life-giving but also erasing. It's a kind of force of forgetting as well as a force of memory. I think I'm managing to be even more rambly than Charlotte. But I mean, so there's a series of sequences in the book which are, I kind of don't want to talk about them because they're spoilers, but this kind of sense that water becomes this kind of force that kind of intrudes into the characters' lives and sweeps things away and takes things, but simultaneously as a kind of way of remembering, I think. So there's a kind of duality about the water in the book.
Absolutely, and that sense of urgency that comes with it too, yeah. Donna, some of the urgent energy in your book comes from this sort of climactic moment where they're working towards an action that might help save the Great Barrier Reef, in their view. How important was the sense of urgency to you in writing with this book, in grappling with both the energy and pacing of the novel, but also the message you wanted to convey?
Yeah, so the choice to make it a chase thriller, which is really propulsive, and it's a real page turner. That's not me just saying that. That's what all the reviews say too. Like, people could not put it down, and I did that on purpose because I wanted to capture that moment. It's set right now. Well, 6 years ago now. But you know, that sense that we need to act now. Because climate change is unrolling. But for those of you who may not know anything about my book, it starts when the protagonist, Jagger, blows a whistle on his father's illegal business activities. His father's a billionaire Sydney property developer. And then Jagger freaks out about what he's done, and he jumps on a train and ends up here in the Budai National Park. You can see it there. And he hides out in one of the sandstone caves. I don't know, some of you may know, there's beautiful sandstone caves there. But he doesn't realise it, he soon does after a while, that the cave's already occupied by a radicalised, hairy-legged, dreadlocked eco-warrior. And he's still in his business suit, so they take one look at each other and it's hatred at first sight. So of course I trap them together on the run in her biofueled car, and all sorts of things happen, but I just raise the stakes so it just gets worse and worse for them, because I wanted to capture that sense of, this is big and it's hurling straight ahead, and once the characters stop and turn around and take action, then maybe things can change. But yeah, so it was definitely a conscious choice to make it really like urgent, and it's also a love story, and of course he gets right into a hare in the end.
In lots of ways. Thanks for that image, Donna. Would you like to read a little bit from the Rewilding to give us all a sense? So I think this piece you've chosen speaks to that Nia's internal voice around the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah, okay. You should have heard how wild the ocean was last night, smashing against the earth, trying to wake us up. Yet we sleep on, oblivious, except the trees, the insects, the birds, those that sense it. Every night I try to seek company in the stillness of the moon, but she only reminds me of death with her white skull light shining down on the absence of you. Thank you for coming to me today in that place where mystery keeps its constant vigil. In sleep, I can be with you always, in that dream world where we swam through coral reefs, in their last flush of life, bleach white and fluorescent. Who would have thought the throes of death could be so beautiful? Before today, I'd never heard in a dream. The fry pan pop of coral and crunch of parrotfish was so real, I thought you would come back into life, even though your hand was cold and your eyes wouldn't fix on mine. You weren't there for me. You were there for what is left of the Great Barrier. I know there'll come a day when I'll stop crying, when my heart will be scarred like the chiseled sandstone I've seen here, a convict wall of blood gone cold. Until then, I write through damp blotches, creating smudges of memories of you, and the lost beauty of our world.
James, I might invite you to read a little bit from Landfall as well, and then we'll discuss all of these beautiful texts together.
There'll be a test. So, I've never read from this book because it's only been out for a couple of weeks. So I'm reading a bit from near the beginning. The book, it's set in Sydney, but sea levels have come up about 5 metres, and the area around Botany Bay has flooded.
I think we were looking at page 5. Page 5, James.
It was page 5. So they've basically just reached the tide line, and they're heading out. None of them spoke as they set off towards the water. Kuri scanned the buildings around them, one hand resting on her vest as if to go for her taser or her baton. Larkin looked less like he was heading into enemy territory, but he was no less wary. When they reached the tide line, they paused. The morning air was windless, and tiny waves washed slowly back and forth on the asphalt. No matter how many times she came here, she found the sight of the houses and apartments half submerged by the invading water strangely surreal. She gestured to the right, where a floating duckboard secured to the front of an old apartment building led out to a raised walkway. "That way," she said, and Larkin nodded. Although it had been constructed out of salvaged materials, the walkway was surprisingly sturdy. At first it followed the line of the road, bending here and there to avoid an obstacle or intersecting with other walkways leading to houses and buildings. While most of the single-storey structures were abandoned, the upper floors of the taller buildings were still inhabited, their peeling walls and roofs patched with bricks and tin and polymers. Some had pontoons attached to their sides or narrow docks with boats moored beside them. Others had duckboards running between them. On one, lashed to the front of a rust-stained block of flats, a woman stood watching 2 small children play by the water's edge. Above them, the roof of the building had been torn off, and fading tarpaulins were held in place with thick cord. As they passed the older of the children, a girl of 3 or 4 wearing a grimy pink singlet looked up, and Sadia lifted her hand and gave her a small wave. The girl fell still, regarding Sadia solemnly until the woman behind her stepped forward and pulled her back. Just past the dead hulk of an old Moreton Bay fig tree lying on its side in the water, Larkin directed them onto a pontoon that headed off to one side. The water was deeper here, almost entirely covering the ground floor of some of the apartment buildings, and white sand and blackened leaves and rotting branches were visible scattered across the cracked asphalt a metre or 2 below the surface. On a patch of higher ground on the far side of the road, a series of temporary structures constructed out of shipping containers rode several stories high. A tan-coloured dog with more than a hint of dingo about it was standing on top of one, quivering with attention at something Sadia couldn't see. As they swung past, it barked at them, then disappeared, only to emerge a few moments later on the ground level and race along the water's edge, snarling.
Thank you, James. I'm not sure either of these would be things you'd be reading your children at night. Might give them nightmares, but thank you. And Charlotte, can we hear from you? We've got the voice of the 9-year-old boy you referenced earlier.
Yeah, sure. So the book is narrated by each of the family members. The little boy, Orly, who's 9, his chapters are all seed stories. So it's him, his love language is seeds, and telling the story of the seeds in this vault that he loves, telling these stories to Rowan as she sort of recovers from having nearly drowned. He's sort of trying to seduce her with his seeds. Okay. Let's start with the greatest traveller among them, shall we? In aisle E, row 34, sits the Taraxacum officinale. Sorry, my Latin pronunciation is very poor. Otherwise known as the common dandelion. The dandelion is found all over the world in pretty much any habitat. It's a survivor. It can grow in lawns or fields, in rocky hillsides or woodlands. It might be the first to sprout up in a new ecosystem or the longest standing in an old one. The story of this particular dandelion is a good one. You will want to pay attention. It starts its life in an apple orchard in North America, let's say Wisconsin. It nearly gets trodden on so many times, but luck is on its side. Because it bursts to life early in spring, much earlier than most flowers, it's an important source of food to a whole bunch of insects and birds. Its pollen is rubbed onto the underside of a leaf-cutting bee, then carried to a female dandelion. The bee goes on to pollinate lots of other wild plants and flowers in his travels, but let's stay with the dandelion for now. Its nectar is feasted on by the earliest butterflies and moths to emerge from their cocoons. Today, this nectar also happens to feed a hummingbird and a woodpecker. As it ages, the dandelion's head turns from its bright yellow petals to become a seed head, or as I like to call it, a blowball. The blowballs have a whole lot of single seeds with tiny hairs on tops, and these seeds fly in a way we humans had never seen before we saw the dandelion fly. On a balmy afternoon, the seeds of the blowball are lifted by a gust of wind. Some of them land not too far away and are gobbled up by sparrows and goldfinches. Some travel a different way to be eaten by a quail, a wild turkey, and a grouse. One is eaten by a field mouse, one by a chipmunk. But there's one seed that strikes out further than the rest. It really flies. Across state lines into Minnesota, floating and dancing, it travels 100 kilometres. 100. That is a mind-boggling distance for a tiny seed carried only by wind. Can you imagine? The furthest a seed has ever travelled by air. But it's not finished, what is left of this dandelion. It has more to do. When it lands in Minnesota, it's right in the path of a hungry white-tailed deer. The seed of the dandelion feeds the deer until it walks into the path of another creature, a grey wolf. She's been looking for food for a long time. She devours the deer, taking enough meat to survive for weeks and sharing the rest of it with her mate and pups. It keeps her going a little longer in a difficult, hungry life. The wolves keep hunting together, keep the deer on the move, and allow the plants and the trees of this land to grow. They keep rivers and soil healthy. They attract insects and mammals and birds to the ecosystem. They make it healthy enough for more dandelions to seed and sprout and start the whole cycle again. But the dandelion, this single flower that's given nourishment to countless other living creatures, is considered a weed.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. It reminds me of a beautiful children's story I used to read my girls, Eric Carle's The Tiny Seed. It's beautiful and showing us how much we need to value each little thing. So, from all these readings and thinking about the impact of these stories and the impact we hope they have, we all know that stories have tremendous power. They move us, they make us feel something, and right when that emotional connection is strongest, they can convey the most powerful ideas. And they land with us in a very particular way because it's not just information, it's a whole visceral experience. There's been some extraordinary work done about narrative change and the power of stories to change the way we think about our world, to challenge the myths that we tell ourselves, to challenge our status quo. I'm curious if I can ask all of you, and there's some extraordinary work done about this in places like Stanford and all over the place that are looking at the power that we have to affect systems change through story. I'm curious to ask you all, reflecting on sending these novels out into the world, what do you hope that each of the readers might take away from that novel once the final page is turned, once they've put the book down with a little sigh of having read a great book? What do you hope stays with them? If I can start with you, perhaps, Charlotte.
Yeah, I think it is. I've got a difficult engagement with responsibility, particularly writing climate fiction, which is now a genre of its own. But I think we tend to sort of, these days certainly, we have a whole set of notions and ideas and ways that we see the world which nothing can penetrate. We have these really firmly within our minds, and I think the only thing that has any hope of shifting these is a feeling. You know, you spoke about the power of stories, and I think if we can make people feel a certain way, they're far more likely to try and match their thoughts to these feelings. And so that's the only thing that I try to do with my work. I just try to reach people with emotion first and hope that thought follows suit, a changing of the way they see things. I think, we all want to kind of instill hope in our readers, but it's important for me that hope doesn't just remove our responsibility to make change. Sometimes when we hope that things will be okay, we're sort of hoping that somebody else will just solve the problem. But I would like to think that this hope can kind of energise us and galvanise us and lead to what I think is far more important, and that's purpose.
Thanks, Charlotte. It's really powerful. James?
So probably a bit like Charlotte, I have a slightly uncomfortable engagement with the way novels that are in this kind of space get kind of instrumentalised. Like there's this kind of sense that if it's a novel that's got climate stuff in it, somehow it should be saving the world. It seems to me if your test for the novel is did it save the world, probably the novel is going to fail. And we don't expect a novel about divorce to stop divorce. Having said that, I think that, I'm not particularly... I would actually disagree with Charlotte about them being a genre. I think that there is a kind of sense in which climate is the lived reality of our world now, and so it's a condition like modernity that we kind of inhabit. So these things get called a genre, but they're not really a genre. This is the fiction of our world. And some things my book was actually trying quite explicitly to do was just to kind of erase that boundary between now and then. So the stuff in it, most of it actually comes from now. It's just been moved into the future. But I also think that one of the things, I think there's a whole bunch of things that books in this space can do. I think there's stuff about kind of trying to create a space for kind of political possibility. I think we live in a world that there's a Marxist theorist called Mark Fisher who had a wonderful line about living in a world where capitalism extends to every horizon. There's no other way of thinking about the world. And fiction does create other spaces for that. It creates spaces for possibility. It creates space for saying the world doesn't have to be like this. The world can be other ways. We can organise the world in other ways. But I actually think one of the things I wanted this book to do is I think there's a kind of dissonance that you inhabit if you spend a lot of time in this space, and you start to feel like one of those people walking around with a sandwich board on saying the end of the world is nigh, and you feel like you're crazy because it's like that the world is we are in so much trouble, and then the world just kind of barrels on with like no one seems to notice, and it seems to me that there is something that fiction can do about allowing you to sit in that space, to actually not feel like you're crazy, to kind of think this is... Donna Haraway talks about staying with the trouble. Fiction is a way of staying with the trouble. It's a way of sitting in that space of trouble and saying, this is where we are. How are we going to think about this? How are we going to position ourselves emotionally? How are we going to position ourselves politically? What are we going to do? And Deep Water, the book, my non-fiction book that came out last year, is trying to do a similar kind of thing about saying there is no point of resolution. We're in something. And we need to sit in that space and hold all of those things and work out what the hell we do with them. And I think fiction gives you a place to do that.
Thanks, James. Yeah, it's a lot of work to take on these stories, isn't it? And thank you all for doing it. Donna, what's your hopes for your novel, Rewilding, and your subsequent work?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting, the whole idea of purpose and fiction and the where we are now in history. I remember being in my 20s, reading a Bukowski short story, which was so disgusting, and I love Bukowski, but I threw the book across the room, and I couldn't even pick it back up, and I rang my friend Dave, who had lent me the book of short stories, and I said, that story, it's just a drunk pedophile's fantasy. It was a really disgusting story. No redemption, no insight. And Dave was like, he can write whatever he wants, he's a writer. And Noam Chomsky was in town He was giving a talk at the New South Wales Writers' Centre, and the title was, "Should Fiction Writers Have a Moral Conscience?" So Dave and I went along, and we had a $20 bet. I was like, I bet you he's going to say yes. And Dave was like, nah, he's going to say, we can write whatever we want. And lo and behold, he said, fiction writers are the storytellers. They are powerful shamans that lead the way and show the way through, and they must have a moral conscience. Dave still owes me $20. But yeah, so, you know, this thing creates emissions, it cuts trees down. To me, this is, you know, if you're going to put one of these out in the world, as the beautiful Nadi Simpson, who some of you will be disappointed that I'm not her. I happened to be at a festival with her recently, and her closing statement was, do good dreaming now. And I just thought, oh, yeah, so I don't know, that's how I feel.
Thank you so much, all of you. I think that deserves a clap. And I guess, you know, bringing your skill and your talents to this is so important, and we know that collectively there's this sense of shoulders to the wheel to help us imagine a different way. And there's theories that talk about story as light because they eliminate other possibilities, stories as glue because they connect us to new possibilities and to a community of like-mindeds, and stories as web that kind of take us with them and sort of challenge the myths we tell ourselves. And there's a sense that perhaps individually each story doesn't change the world, but collectively and read collectively they might just change the way we think, which is so powerful. I'm going to throw out to questions in just a moment, but I've just got one more while you're all thinking of your brilliant questions. We were talking backstage, and Charlotte, you raised this before. We're all parents on this panel. Shout out my daughters in the room. Hi, Isabel. You know, there's a real quandary that all of your characters grapple with about having children at the moment, and this sort of you know, your terrible fear for children in this space. Would you like to reflect a little bit on how you felt writing that as parents yourselves and how personal that quandary is for you? James.
I get to go first.
Yep.
My children are kind of teenagers. They're not as small as Charlotte's, but I don't know. It makes me sad when I hear young people saying I'm not going to have children because the world's such a mess. Because it seems to me that children are fundamentally a kind of, not just an act of hope, but a kind of act of investment in the future. They're about saying, you know, I want this to continue. And at a kind of personal level, I think they put a kind of floor on despair. Like, you can't be... I mean, I think despair is a dick move in the first place. I mean, I just think it's one of those things that, you know, despair is a luxury. Most of us, you know, most of us in this room are privileged enough to have that luxury, but that doesn't make it okay. Like, you know, there's a kind of sense in which giving up is a kind of failure. And it just, you know, to kind of diverge slightly, there's a particular mode of mostly man who kind of does the world's fucked, I'm the only one who's brave enough to see this. And I just think that is a kind of dick move. You know, like it's actually about, because the world isn't. You know, there's always more there to save. There's always something that you can fix. But I think with kids, there's a kind of, they are about a kind of investment in the future. And I don't think if you are a parent, you can give way to despair. You just can't. Like, you know, neither politically nor personally. So, yeah.
I like that. I'm going to get a T-shirt that says "Despair is a dick move." I like that.
Despair is a dick move.
Donna, maybe...
I can talk at length about that if you like.
Yeah. Donna, what are your views?
So Nia very much tackles that in this book, the whole idea of, you know, she's 24, so, you know, should she have a kid or not? And I devoted the rewilding to my kids. I'm a mum. I write very much from that place. I think it's the mother in me that gets me up at 4 a.m. and writes that next sentence. That and all the frogs that are dying in the world at the moment. Frogs are probably the most vulnerable species on the planet at the moment as far as going extinct. But yeah, I definitely write from a place, that mother place, that is what is driving me. I think when I was younger it was more ego, like rewards or accolades, and now it's just, I'm definitely writing from another place. And I'm very familiar with these two amazing writers sitting beside me, their work, and I know they're writing from that place too. And I feel very privileged and honoured to be here with them today. So
thanks, Donna. And Charlotte, your characters grapple with this, and I know you're right in the thick of it with your family. What are your reflections? Obviously, Rowan makes a very particular choice in her.
Yeah. So Rowan's quite different from me. I have always known that I want to have children. I'm also extremely conscious of the carbon footprint of having children. And I think, I wrote this in a haze of horrifying pregnancy sickness, and then with my infant son, he was with me. I took him to Macquarie Island on a crazy research trip when he was 1, which was insane. We got onto this boat. I just sort of contacted them and said, would it be crazy for me to bring my baby? I really need to research Macquarie Island. And they were like, well, we've never done it before, but bring him on down. And so I brought him on down, and the first thing that the leader of the expedition said when she saw me carrying him in his big puffy life vest was, oh no, we told them not to let you come. Because it was such a crazy trip, and it can be really wild. The ocean down there is nuts, but we were very lucky. We had incredibly kind of calm seas, and everything turned out really well. And it was an extraordinary research trip. But all of that to sort of say that my children were very, very present for me while I was writing this book, which is for them and about them, and it's about people choosing to have children despite all the reasons not to. My main character, Rowan, is childless by choice, and I think that's a really interesting, complex decision as well to make. It's a decision that a lot of women cop a lot for. I think, the very sexist stereotype of it is that it's for women who are kind of career obsessed and unfeeling, but that's not usually the case at all. So I wanted to sort of demystify that idea and show that there is a huge range of reasons to choose not to have children, but that there is also an immense capacity within those people to love other people's children and to love the planet with that same kind of courage and generosity. And so she has made this choice, and then of course is faced with the impossibility of not falling in love with these children on this island, and comes to realise that in the face of world's end, love should not shrink, it should grow. And that was something that I learnt myself while writing the book and having my kids.
Oh, beautiful, Charlotte, thank you. So we now have time for some questions, which I know you've been thinking about. Do we have the first questioner? Thank you.
Hi, I just read Landfall, which I can highly recommend. I thought it interesting that his book deals with climate change, refugees arriving in Australia in large numbers, whereas Professor Clive Hamilton's book called Living Hot does not mention it at all. I like Cli-Fi. This year I've read Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, The Road by Cormac McCarthy and Juice by Tim Winton. Can the panel recommend their favourite Cli-Fi books? Thank you.
You've got a pretty good reading list there. Are you okay?
The King Solver book still stands up, I think. Flight Behaviour is an amazing book and interesting because it's one of the really early ones and it homes in on questions of class, I think, which lots of them don't. What else is good?
I like all of Richard Powers' stuff. I think he's fantastic. I would definitely just read all of his.
I did a panel with Richard in
What's
Vancouver.
He like?
So before I did the panel, I was in London with a friend of mine who used to publish him for years, and he said, "Oh, look, he's wonderful." He said he's incredibly smart, he's unbelievably lovely, and he's incredibly tall. And then I met him, and he's incredibly smart, he's unbelievably lovely, and he is so tall. He must be 6'8" or 6'9".
Which is so funny because his main novel's called
He's gigantic.
Overstory, right?
He's so tall, He's extraordinary. You know what you'd want Richard Powers to be like is what Richard Powers is like.
Amazing. Donna?
I would recommend Prodigal Summer by Barbara Kingsolver. It's my favourite Barbara Kingsolver. Clade by someone. And Once There Were Wolves by someone else.
Very generous. Good on you, Donna. Any further questions? Who else is next? Yes, in the middle there.
Hi. Mainly to Charlotte, because I've just recently read the book. You're really mean to your characters. It's quite hard sometimes. Kind of turn to the next chapter thinking, gee, I hope this gets a bit easier for some of them. So I'm not giving don't want to give spoilers, but how do you feel about that when you're creating them? Do you not have a saviour sort of complex coming in that you'd like to helicopter in a solution?
I do save them. I mean, that's the first thing you learn when you do a degree in screenwriting. Be mean to your characters. But honestly, I don't feel like I am. I just feel like I'm being honest with them and trying to create them as people who are complex and existing in real spaces in the world and have wounds to bear and decisions to make. And I don't know, I guess that's where you allow them to be the most courageous and the most loving in spite of those things. So I always feel like I know what you're talking about, and I don't want to give the ending away, but there's so much healing in this book and these characters. I think they have a lot to kind of carry with them, as so many of us do. But I love my characters, and I try to kind of give them the most enriching, loving relationships with each other and with the environment around them. You know, they're so kind of fulfilled by the natural world and by this extraordinary place that they live. I don't know. I don't see myself as being particularly mean, more than any other writer.
What's the definition of story? Things get worse.
Yeah.
Things get worse, and we grapple with hope and with fury and with opportunity in all of the pages. So do we have one more question? We do. Okay, I'll probably have time just for one more. Thanks.
Thank you, all of you. It's been fantastic. I'm just really interested. I'm a very early writer. Nature writing is what I'm doing. And I'm just really interested about your research. I think particularly, Charlotte, you did, obviously, the dandelion story is exactly that. Like how much... I'm also a horticulturalist, but, how much do you don't know, and then how much do you have to learn in order to be able to write? And James's deep ocean story would have been full of so much research. So how do you do it in a nutshell?
In 20 words or less. Work hard?
Yeah, how long is a piece of string? I start my projects with no knowledge about anything. So I just have to... that dandelion story took me... it's 2 pages. It took days, if not weeks, of research to try and work out where the hell a dandelion seed goes and what it does on its life. And it's just reading, lots and lots of reading, and, there's a lot of research which was physical research, as I mentioned, going to Macquarie. There's a big part of the research in this. So I think it's just a combination of setting out into the places you want to explore, and then also filling in all the gaps of what you don't know with loads of reading, as much reading as you possibly can. I don't know how to do it.
James, what about you?
You're much better at research than probably either of us.
You need to ask Donna about her psychedelics research after me. So it's different with fiction and non-fiction. With fiction, I guess, often feel with fiction, research gets in the way at the beginning. Like, you kind of want to write and see where it goes, and then you go back and fill stuff in, but that's not a very efficient way of doing it, because then you discover you've got it all wrong and you've got to change it. But, so there, but with non-fiction, it's a much more, you have to read a lot, you have to go places. I mean, you kind of have to go to the places and see them and talk to people, and often the story is not what you think the story is going to be. And I always think with non-fiction, one of the things that you need to be open to is discovering that you're wrong, or that you think this is a story about this, and in fact it's a story about that, and that is sometimes extremely inconvenient for the thing that you're writing, or trying to massage a scientist to give you the quote that that you need. It's like, can you just say this? Because I can make it my final line in the article. But yeah, so I mean, I do think it's that kind of... It's a process of kind of following the thing and seeing where it goes. I mean, I don't know. I mean, a problem for me is I'm one of these people who I never know what I need to know till I'm writing. So even when I'm writing non-fiction, usually I write a bit and then I go away and have to find something out. And, I'm not very good at doing that thing where people do, they do all the research and then they just go in and write. I just can't work like that. Because whether I'm writing fiction or non-fiction, it's a very kind of bit-by-bit process. The next bit will have to be like that, so...
Donna, do you want to say anything final about your process?
I think with climate fiction...
Tell us about the drugs, Donna.
The research changes too, because when I first started writing this book, the dominant, and it's hard to remember this, but the dominant conversation in Australia is climate change real? It wasn't very long ago. And strangely, it was David Attenborough's film. It was almost overnight when he put that film out about the planet. Almost overnight, I noticed, even kids I work at a high school a couple of days a week, and they were like, "Oh, climate change is real, miss. It's really happening." I was like, "Yeah, wow." David Attenborough he's got a lot of pull. But yeah, so it changed. My stuff in my book kept changing. The longer I took to write the damn thing, I had to readjust, because it's a beast that was beautiful weather, but we're actually in a red emergency zone. Alarm bells should be ringing. We're going to die if we don't act now. So, yeah, anyhow, I don't want to end on that note.
There's a note to end on, Donna. Thank you.
Who gave me this microphone?
But perhaps we can end also on the hope of the stories and the ability of stories like David Attenborough's to change collective consciousness.
And we all die in the end anyway, don't
we?
Yeah,
well, yeah. But please join me in thanking our fabulous panel.